Hello and welcome to the CX Files podcast. I'm your host, Mark Hillary. This week I'm speaking with Steve Morrell, the Managing Director of ContactBabel. ContactBabel is an industry analyst firm which studies the global contact center and customer engagement industries. They recently published the 18th annual edition of their Contact Center Decision Makers Guide, which analyzes the customer service industry with feedback from over 200 different companies. I called Steve to ask him about the new research and to explain some of the key trends that he's seeing when speaking to companies about CX today. Okay, let's go straight to the interview with Steve. Okay, Steve, so you recently published a white paper focused on the difference between UK baby boomers and millennials, and specifically how these different demographic groups are actually different types of customer. But there's some analysts that reject the use of demographics for segmenting customers. So what are your findings then? And is there a real difference at this kind of general level?
Right, well, we certainly can't assume that all people of a certain age behave identically, obviously, but there is enough evidence to show a pattern and suggest that factors such as socioeconomic group and especially age play a part in customer choice of channel. But really, it's one of the big differences was the reason for contacting a business, and that's the thing that makes a real difference, probably even more so than any demographic. Businesses should really be trying to quantify the number of contacts of each type that they get. So things like high urgency, high emotion, high complexity. And from that, look to be resourcing channels correctly based on these and also the preferences of their specific customer base, whether it's through age or demographic or what have you.
Okay, so did you find then that millennials and baby boomers have actually got different expectations about what's actually going to change their opinion or impact their opinion on the quality of customer service when they contact an organization?
Yeah, very much so. So for millennials, for example, it's all about the availability of contact. So they expect long opening hours, not exactly 24/7, but certainly not just 9 to 5. They also place a lot of emphasis on not spending a long time on the contact itself, whether that's either talking or typing. So short contact durations are seen as vital. If you compare this to baby boomers in here we've categorized as 65 plus age group, they're much more about first contact resolution. About not being passed around agents, which is a particular hate of theirs, and not having to wait in a queue for long. So if you like the more typical idea about what a good contact center or customer service experience looks like. They're also, the baby boomers are far more likely to want UK-based agents than millennials do. So, for example, throw a stat out, 59% of this cohort say that this is a top 3 factor for their customer experience, compared to only 33% of millennials.
Was there any did you identify any reason for that? Is it really just that, younger consumers are used to talking to friends all over the world on WhatsApp and on games and stuff like that then?
Yeah, I mean, that's really... it's not something that we looked at the reason for it. We're just asking, what rather than why. I mean, that's a reasonable explanation. I also think that by the time you're getting to 65, then you've spoken to an awful lot of companies in your life, and maybe you remember some bad offshore experiences, for example, whereas those of the 18 or 19 years old haven't experienced that in a kind of commercial relationship before, and they don't know that it is actually or can be potentially an issue for them. So we do have to factor in experience here.
Okay, and we're seeing a lot of automation in contact centers at the moment, particularly that kind of first contact, to try and use automated systems like chatbots to resolve simple problems. Is there a difference in attitude and acceptance between these different age groups for these kind of automated systems?
Yeah, when I was putting this survey together and wrote that question, I thought, well, I don't even know why I'm writing this question, because I already know the answer to it. The younger generation are bound to be far more up for, artificial intelligence and automation, because, they don't want to talk to real people and stuff like this. And in fact, I was completely wrong. It was an interesting finding. We asked customers if they would prefer to speak to an agent or use automation if the effort, outcome, and time spent were exactly the same. So you would think that, they think, oh yeah, automation, that's what we'd like to do. But in fact, the customer base as a whole isn't yet at a stage where automation is seen as being preferable to the human touch. So, put some numbers on that. Both age groups prefer talking to employees rather than using automation. 68% in the case of the baby boomers, but it's as high as 49% for millennials. Having said that, of those 51% of millennials that, didn't say they definitely preferred talking to a person, they were more willing to try automation than baby boomers. But the gap certainly isn't as large as we would have expected.
And I don't know if it's in your research, but do you think that sort of effect is more to do with the driver of the call rather than the demographic of the customer? I mean, for example, there's a big difference between someone calling to reset a password because they can't get into a retail site and somebody calling an insurer to tell them that their spouse just died.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It's the type of call, which is something that we look at also within the report. But yeah, it's not the case that it's simply appropriate to shovel everything off to automation in the first instance, because at the end of the day, the key thing that every single customer wants, regardless of their age, is to get the issue solved. They're not ringing for a chat. They've got something to do and they want to do it. And in many cases, automation, even if it's well done, isn't necessarily the most appropriate form of communication for them.
Mm-hmm. So does that lead to a preference for different channels then? I mean, this difference that we were talking about between, say, an emotional call or just something that's urgent?
Yeah, I mean, we split it out because, as you indicated earlier in the call, it's not simply appropriate to say everybody young does this and everybody old does that. It's like, why are people calling? So we asked the question, we put 3 scenarios in front of our 1,000 customers. We did this for the UK and for the US. So we gave them situations whereby they might be experiencing high emotion, it might be high urgency, or it might be highly complex. So, for example, the high emotion interactions, we used an example of having the wrong product delivered. You're looking forward to receiving something, you get it, and it's the wrong size, they've sent you the wrong thing entirely, and now it's your problem to send it back. Mm-hmm. It's very frustrating. It's probably not incredibly urgent unless it's Christmas or a birthday coming up, and it's certainly not particularly complex. So this is focused on the high emotion, really irritating type of thing. So how do you deal with with this? Well, millennials would generally send an email to the company or maybe initiate a web chat. That's their preference. Whereas the baby boomers are far more likely to pick up the phone and start venting, and they've also learned from experience that this is the most effective way to get stuff done. So that's the high emotion side of things. If you look at highly urgent interactions, the example we used was check-in flight time if you're picking someone up from the airport. Again, it's not a complicated thing to do. Tends not to be particularly highly emotional. You just need to get some information and get on with it. Both age groups were very much of the view that they go online or use a mobile app, and this is when the kind of the age demographics thing and pigeonholing people really falls down. So this is a simple, really good opportunity to use self-service or automation. Having said that, older people, a significant chunk of older people also said they'd pick up the phone, but they were more likely to be using automation or self-service. Mm-hmm. And finally, for the highly complex interactions, so we used examples of completing a difficult form, so like a tax form or a mortgage application. Baby boomers really went out there. Actually, they came up with a thing that we didn't expect, and they said they wanted face-to-face help. So actually going out to a bank or something and sitting down with somebody and filling in a form, whereas millennials were far more requiring digital assistance, so either web chat or email, certainly not face-to-face. Mm-hmm. but it's something I wanted to mention was a real key question coming out of this research. I mean, there's a lot of answers in this research, but the key question that came out of it is whether millennials will change their preference as they get older, or are they going to stick with what they're comfortable with now? Because this is the big bet for businesses. Do we just stick as we are because people are going to change, or is this digital channel automation, is this the thing of the future? And the research doesn't give a way of knowing what will happen until it actually happens. My own view is that millennials won't suddenly decide one day after their 35th birthday or whatever they want to pick up the phone or visit a bank to discuss these things. They'll be used by then to online support and automation. They'll want to keep it and they want to improve it even as they get older. I mean, that's my personal view on it. So, rather than being backed up by any sort of research.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because we hear the digital native term quite often, and that implies that there's a change in behavior. But I guess that no one's really sort of studied over a long period of time, do people adopt different habits or channel preferences as they get older?
This is it, and I think it boils down to the experience that you personally have had as a consumer. If you look back to when email support was brought in quite a serious way in the early 2000s, a lot of people tried it. They'd wait 3 or 4 days for a response that maybe never came, or it would be irrelevant when it came, and by that time they'd called the call center. So that kind of polluted the whole pool for email support, because that you simply knew that you weren't going to get a decent answer out of it. Nowadays, email is far better than it was then. So people are more willing to use it for multiple companies because they've had a good experience with one company. They're going to try it with another. And I think it does boil down to the experience that people have had. So maybe people of the older generation, they are used to doing things in a face-to-face or telephony manner. And, they know that works, even if it's not terribly convenient for them. But it works, so, why change it? For your millennials, if they are getting, a good level of support through web chat and email, through numerous businesses, and this is what they've been brought up on, then, I can't see why they would want to change as they get older.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then just finally, I know that your research covers both the US market and also the UK market, and I think we've been talking mostly about the UK research, but are there any notable differences in the customer attitudes or expectations when you're looking at the same kind of research across the Atlantic, basically?
Yeah, I mean, the main difference similarity with the US and UK millennials, the availability is key. They want short call times and they want 24/7. I mean, that's what they want. Americans value the kind of politeness and friendliness of agents far more than UK customers, which was an interesting finding. And US baby boomers really, really like using the phone. That's what they do. So if you look at as a whole, you see that UK customers as a whole tend to be more comfortable and willing to try digital channels than US customers. The phone is still very much king in the US.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. Please take a moment to review the podcast, because this helps other listeners to find it. And if you have any suggestions, then get in touch with me on Twitter or LinkedIn. I'm @Mark Hillary with 2 L's, or just search Google for Mark Hillary.